So I remember getting this call from a client and they were looking for 6 videos. So right off the bat, I was super excited. I was like, 6 videos? Absolutely. This is like amazing,
Yes, let's do this.
let's hit our quarter goals, right? And we get on the call. And what I learned really quickly is that this is so relatable to every creative and marketing person out there. It's 6 videos, but it has about the budget for 1 or 2. And I feel like that's the topic of conversation right now is
hmm
just these lower budgets. So normally, we would just say no, it's just not right fit for us. But I was curious. I was like, okay, if we could make this work, if we needed to take one video and turn it into 6, like what would that even look like? So it brought to the team. You probably remember this conversation. We had a little design charrette. We kicked around some ideas. And ultimately, where we landed was what if we made a really bespoke template, something super customized that the client could then edit. We make one video, use 2/3 of the budget to create that one, hand it over to the client so they can make the other 5 with the templates that we have in place. And ultimately, that's what we did. And not only did the client get a win, because here's a marketing team that was able to use the budget they had, they were able to deliver all 6 of those videos, but we got a win as well too, because we were able to keep our profit margins, make it profitable, and make some work that looks really good. And I think what I love about that project is just this level of innovation and just thinking about things a different way. And I think that's where we are now when we're talking about, ways to maximize budgets, which is what this episode is going to be about today. So super proud of that project, how it turned out. And for folks who are just joining us, if you don't know who the heck we are, my name is Mack Garrison. I'm the co-founder and director of content at Dash Studio. We're a high-end animation and motion design agency that simplifies complexity and helps connect audiences to their communities. And I'm joined by our talented EP, Meryn Hayes, who's been with us now, Meryn, 6 years?
Yeah, 6 years. Hard
Oh
to
my.
believe. Time flies.
Time flies. I know you're excited to talk about anything related to budgets, just given your role.
Yeah, always ready to talk about maximizing budgets. How can we get creative? I think that story that you mentioned is just, it's problem solving at its best. And I think that's something that we're always trying to do, especially as EP, trying to find like creative ways we can push the limits for our clients. How do we streamline profit and like efficiencies internally? It's all wrapped up in how we maximize. And I think that's something that's really top of mind these days.
Yeah, me too. I think the same thing. And I think it's serendipitous that we're having this conversation. Start of the year, folks on the marketing side are thinking about, okay, great. I have less of a budget than I had last year. How do I maximize the content that I can make? And if you're on the creative side, you're thinking about what are some creative ways that I can build up more efficiency so I can work with some smaller budgets. So excited to get into some of that stuff with you today.
Yeah. I think the way that like we've thought about it internally, we've broken it down to in a few categories. So it's like strategy and planning, a producer's favorite things, tools and technology, having the discussion of like outsourcing versus in-house, and then looking at the trends and the industry as a whole, which obviously people are always thinking about like what's happening next. So we want to jump into a few different things, but we can kind of go through it at a high level from those like categories.
Sure. Yeah, sounds great.
So jumping right in, this is a hard one to start. So get
Okay.
ready.
I'm ready.
What do you think the biggest mistakes are when businesses are trying to stretch content needs? I mean, they're looking at a budget at an overarching year, quarterly perspective. How do you think that what mistakes are they making as they're trying to stretch that content?
Honestly, I think part of it is just trying to have one piece of content do too much. There's this idea of just trying to stretch what you're making and make it as evergreen as possible. And so I think one of the realities is just that what used to be, inviting people into your living rooms the first time they get to your house, right? It's like the one piece of video. That's all you need. We throw this up on YouTube, it works, and that's fine. It's a great introduction. The reality is that there's 4 different decision makers, 4 generations in the workforce now, and we've never had that. You've got baby boomers, you got Gen Z, Gen X, and millennials, and every one of those folks now are at a decision-making perspective. So I think about this idea, this day and age is almost like a content shelf. You have to have pieces of content that are available for all the right channels and all the right people who are accessing it for your brand. So if you think about, the baby boomer generation, this is folks who are historically looking at like gated content, direct emails, PDF, white papers. You have Gen X and millennials who are doing Google searches, they're watching YouTube videos, they're looking on Reddit. And now you got Gen Z who is entering the buying stage and the buying power of their careers. And they're digesting stuff in-app searches like on TikTok and Instagram. And then
Oh my
also
God,
through like,
am I Gen Z?
yes, exactly. You are accessing this stuff through in-app. So the reality is what used to be, let me invite you into my house, let me meet your brand for the first time in the living room. It just doesn't work like that anymore. You have to have content that's tailored towards each of those needs. And I was really interested by this, and I actually pulled a stat ahead of this call. If you look at the workforce right now, 36% of it is made up by millennials, 31% is Gen X, 18% is Gen Z, and 15% is baby boomers, just to kind of give that lay of the land of demographics. So again, I think it's just really interesting how this one content fits all just doesn't work anymore. You have to have content tailored towards individual needs of these channels. And I think that's the biggest mistake that I see brands make.
What I like about the metaphor of a shelf too is that like it's ever changing, right? Like you're changing it seasonally, you're adding new decor, or like it has to be like ever breathing. It's like a living thing that you need
it's
to
almost
keep
like a
updating.
Retail store, right? Like you go to a retail to buy something.
New inventory
like, right,
coming
exactly.
in. Yeah.
I like that.
So based on all of that, there's a lot of content that's out there, obviously, especially with apps and video being like king of content. Out of all the content types, given all of these different individuals and that they might be like targeted towards one or the other, what do you think is the most important priority of that content type, like blogs, social, video, in-app stuff?
Well, I think, truthfully, I'm going to probably be a little bit biased just by the fact that we run an animation and video production agency.
What?
But I do think you can make a lot of those pieces off of video. I mean, video historically has had some really high conversion rates. I think about like even some statistics I've got in front of me right here. Conversion rates on websites featuring video have an average conversion rate of 4.8 compared to 2.9% for sites without videos. Think about social media and like what you're digesting. Video content attracts viewers twice as much engagement compared to ones that just have images. And then just in general message retention, people are retaining more of what they're digesting with video content. And I think, it kind of goes back when you're talking about like blogs or social media or how have you these different content pieces in the content shelf, you can really use video. And we'll talk about that here, I think, shortly on breaking that down. So if you capture something on video, you can kind of create the blogs, you can create the social cut downs and some of these auxiliary pieces that go into it from that main video.
Yeah. So it's like you're not ignoring all the other content types when you're focusing on video. You're able to like, spread it out across everything.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. What do you think? I mean, talking with clients, they're always trying to be conscious of budget.
Yeah.
As we all are.
As we all are.
What about like cost-effective ways that are high impact in terms of what you've seen lately?
Yeah, I think there's like two different routes. There's like higher impact but lower budget, and then higher budget with high impact. So there's kind of two directions. I think if you're just trying to get something off the ground, one of my best recommendations is always doing something like a graphics package. Think about how disparate a lot of companies' videos are. You have a conference that you capture some content at. You had your video editor make something from a recent corporate event that's going on. It doesn't really have the same aesthetic. It was shot on different cameras. It feels really disparate. What a good graphics package can do is start unifying those elements. If you have things as simple as like lower thirds, you have title cards coming in, interstitial slides that kind of come in. All of a sudden, some of these edits you've done over the last 5-6 years that feel really disjointed now at least start to feel aesthetically like they're in the same space. And so I think a graphics package is always a really great way to help unify some content that exists. Another piece, just given how data-driven the world is, so many of these organizations, especially with services or products, have a lot of data behind the research and why their product or service was working so great. So I love datagrams because you can take some of those data points that make that product so good and just put that out there for quick, memorable statistics. These can even be static. I mean, of course, I think animated would be better, but those are some easy wins that you could put out there right now across some of those different channels. As you're thinking about what are some bigger pieces you could be doing that maybe has a little bit more of an investment, I think this day and age, there's one recommendation that I think holds true that you can invest in that's just going to give you the most bang for your buck and ultimately give you a ton of content to use for the year. And that's a live action shoot. You know, if you do like an interview style series, a subject matter expert series, let's call it, where you're putting some C-suite executives and interviewing all of them, you could create a subject matter expert series for a YouTube video that lives online that's more like episodic content. You could create cut downs for social media. You could do cut downs for pre-roll ads. You could take some of the static quotes we were talking about. You could pull some of the quotes that you get from those interviews and create designs around that. You could build a blog off the interview series. You could do animation driven by the audio. So, you know, maybe you're using video in itself as a standalone, but you could take that and now have animated elements highlighting some of the things that the subject matter experts are talking towards. And then you could even do like the blog or corresponding Reddit AMA around it. I mean, one investment kind of yields, in my opinion, like an H1 or an H2, 2 quarters worth of content. So I think that is a higher investment, but just the reward and the bang for your buck you get, I think is really good. The other thing I would recommend in that line is more on like templatization, you know, so how can you structure content in a way that it's more evergreen and reusable? So kind of like the top of our conversation, we were highlighting that one project where we turned one video into 6 basically through bespoke templatization. I think that feeds in well here. You know, if you do all these shoots, you create something that's like a graphics package, you know, you have sort of a template that you can plug and play some of these pieces. Well, now you've created the core structure that can be used on other interviews as well. And if the graphics package works really well for you, the next logical step, in my opinion, is like motion branding. You know, as folks consider how their brand moves in the wild, from interactivity on your website to just even defining some of those guidelines. So often we see these really great brands that haven't thought about their movement. You know, is it bouncy and playful? Is it succinct and sharp and to the point? You know, how your brand comes to life is an extension of what you've already built. So I think a motion branding kit is also a great way to extend and expand on like initial investment that give you a lot bang for your buck.
Yeah, and circling back to like the live action yielding a bunch of different content. I mean, that's like you're stocking your shelf with content for all the different audiences. Like you're able to reach a variety of audiences where they are, wherever they are. I think that's something that brands and marketers like must struggle with. Do you feel like there's, for a marketer to think through holistically all of their needs for a year or a quarter, like sometimes that can be a challenge. Do you find that you're getting a lot of insight from like, we just need one explainer video? Are you able to convert them to like, if we do this live action series, we can create explainer video and more? Has that been like an easy conversation?
I think just a lot of it just comes with the reality of like, it just requires a lot of testing right now. And I think any content that can give you an opportunity to try out and test a bunch of things, I think is what's the most valuable. You know, it just comes down to like ABC testing. So not that you couldn't do that with an animated series. We do plenty of animated videos, and I think that's great. And you can do various cut downs for it. The thing that I love about a live action shoot as an initial first endeavor is that you can create animations off those interviews. And now you have an animated piece of content you can test, but you have the live action version you can test. You can have static datagrams, you can have animated datagrams. Basically, you're creating this toolkit where now you can put that out there and you can look back over the course of the quarter and you can say like, what really performed well, what performed better than others. And based on that, you can make inferences and adjustments so that the next quarter you can try to push. It says, okay, maybe our audience really loves the authenticity of the live action stuff. So let's maybe not invest as much in animation. Or conversely, maybe you find that everyone loves the animated content because no one in your space is doing it as well as you are. And now there's an opportunity with more animated pieces. So for me, I think this day and age, it's all about testing. What can you try? What data points can you look at? And how do you refine and make those adjustments to keep your content shelf, as you put it earlier, which I really like a retail, up to date with the best.
Fully stocked,
right? With the stuff that's working really well.
Yeah. I think every conversation that we've had with clients where we're talking about doing a live action shoot, we've always talked about the opportunities, not only just in the interview, but like behind the scenes content. You can take the quotes and pull static or animated quotes. So much of that stuff gets lost on the cutting room floor, that the ideas are there, but the initiative, like the effort, What suggestions would you have for someone who, like, say we do a shoot and we're done, and the goal is to get this one video made? It's hard to like come back to all that other stuff and get enough like intent to want to use the rest of it. Do you feel like that's a challenge, or could like a partnership like working with Dash, like we can jump into all that content?
Well, I think partnership's the biggest key to this. So whether it's working with an agency partner like us, or even just a freelancer that you use, or even your in-house creative, if you have an in-house creative, I think part of it is just understanding what your needs are going into that and really trying to break down silos. If creative is operating in a silo and it's like, okay, I just need to make this, and marketing is operating in a silo, it's like, we just need to make this one video. There's lost opportunity on some of these auxiliary assets that can be produced. Versus if creative and marketing are together and marketing is saying like, hey, these are some of the different channels we're operating on. This is what our demographic is. This is what we're hoping to try to test out. Creative could say like, well, as I'm going through this edit, what if I just go ahead and identify some of these key talking points? And like, now we have a litany of those. Let's review those and maybe we can make some content after it. That is way easier than having to go back and rewatch all this stuff. So I think it's just being on the same page about a plan, I think, is ultimately what it is.
Awesome. Love a good plan. Producer loves a good plan.
Yeah, that's right.
Switching gears a little bit on that note to like technology and kind of on the operational side, do you feel like there's free or low cost tools for content creation and management? I mean, there's a new tool or software popping up every day. What are ones that you found?
No, that's really interesting. I just got back from a leaders retreat with the One Club. It was really fun. It was out in Arizona, and there was a woman from Tiffany from RGA who was speaking. And one of the things she talked about was this idea of being comfortable kind of in the uncomfortable and trying new things. So often tech comes out and it kind of feels abrasive, or you're not sure where to jump in. And because it's so uncomfortable, because you move at a slower pace as you're trying to adopt it, we tend to kind of step back and not use it as quickly. And one thing I really loved of what she said is that for her as a senior leader with her team, she says that the onus is on her to try this first. It may not be the best, but she highlighted like how she designed her kid's birthday party aesthetic using like AI and trying to like kind of create this whole 5-year-old's birthday, right?
Oh my God, that's amazing.
I know, it was really
Eleanor's
adorable.
birthday's coming up. How can I use AI?
Yeah, that's right. Well, what she said was like, I just wanted to see what was possible.
Sure.
So that I had these ideas that then I could take to my team and say, look, I was playing around with this. This is kind of fun. I'd love it if you all explored this a bit further. And I thought that was a really great point for leaders out there, whether you're in the marketing space or creative space. It's like, if there's a new tool, just try it, play around with it. And who knows, maybe it gives you enough power to expand that to the team or try something else. For me personally, I think there's a few things I've been playing around with recently that aren't necessarily novel. Or they've been around for a little bit, but I've just started playing around with them and I really like it. One is Riverside, which we're using right now, this podcasting platform. And
not sponsored, by the way, but like call us Riverside.
Yeah, absolutely. You can sponsor us after the case if you want. But I think the thing that I love about this platform was just how easy it is to pull together. We're launching this video series and podcast series, and I think just the ease of use has made it adaptable. It has features in there for like an AI side of things that helps clean up the audio, and it also helps even suggest some social cut downs for it that are all automated. Pieces like that have been amazing. So I really like this. So if you're sitting there on the sidelines and you're saying, hey, I should do something or create something or do some interviews, I think that's great. Things like Hootsuite, Hootsuite's been around for a while, but if you're a creative who's trying to plan a lot of this content, you're a content marketer, you're putting it out there, or even if you're a small business owner in the creative space and you're doing all your marketing, that has been a godsend for me to like be able to have all these different channels that we're tailoring it to, going back to the content shelf above, and then being able to plan it on there. So I'm not having to manually go into each one of these applications and post it. And then I think maybe the other one I would throw in there would probably be Zapier. Zapier automates workflows. And what I really like about it is like just some of the little things that are very helpful. If there's an automated email that needs to get replied to, you can have those set up. You can also create lists. So if you have someone, through email wants to get added to your newsletter list, there's like a Zapier that can happen for that. So some of those little things, it's not these grandiose pieces, but they make your life easier. And honestly, I think that's the stuff that people are looking for from AI, is like AI or tools and tech what can I do that can help take some of these smaller mundane pieces and alleviate that, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I really appreciate that. Like, just try something for new tools. We as humans are so adverse to change. And so it can
Oh,
be
I know.
so hard to like want to try something new. But I feel like there's so much power in knowledge. And like, once you try something, you can choose to not use it or not like it. But at least you've like tried it. So I love that.
I know.
Not that I'll always jump on it, but I'll
I know
try.
it's hard. I mean, like we are literally, you and I, at the forefront of all this tech and what we're doing, and even for us, it feels difficult sometimes to kind of jump into it, especially when like time is fleeting and you're limited, right? It's hard to be like, oh, okay, I could
I'm
do it
gonna
this
learn.
way, right? That I know how to do it, or I, try something brand new. It's difficult.
I also like the idea that like not everything has to be transformational in terms of change. Like you're talking about these like small things that can make our lives easier. It might not change your whole output, but it can help you a little bit and be more
Yeah.
efficient. Like that's valid.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like it doesn't. I think that's like a misconception, is that it has to be this whole
It's
massive
gonna change your
change.
world.
Right. You have
Yeah.
to like flip your process upside down or anything. So I think it's elemental introductions of some of these things can just make big differences. I mean, we just did that process audit this
Mhm.
year, you and our other producer, Ashley, where we're going through how we work on each of these projects and where can we potentially making up efficiencies. And sometimes, and good news is that we found that we're doing a lot of things well, and it was
Mhm.
really very elemental pieces that we were going
Small.
to tweak, but they could have compounding effects, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. All right, we touched on it a second ago.
Mm-hmm.
The scary AI word. Everyone loves AI, but in terms of less scary, going back to like how can you use it to be efficient? Do we feel like there's easy ways that AI has helped reduce content creation costs or budgets? I mean, this is like a hard conversation for us to have, right?
Sure.
Because the industry is full of like, don't take my job.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is tricky. I think AI and creative right now is very much of a touchy subject. So here's my hot take on it. I think that like AI is still a tool, and when used appropriately, I think it's really beneficial. I think the appropriating artwork that's out there, that's not good, right? No one wants to use a platform that's just stealing a bunch of stuff. But let's think about some of these process pieces. Like we just talked about these platforms,
Mhm.
Riverside, the one we're using right now, has a AI audio feature that cleans it up. It helps create automatic edits to do little cut downs. I mean, that's a huge benefit. That's a
Mhm.
process piece that moves things on a little bit smoother. We've used AI for projects where we've had to bring in imagery. Maybe it was low fidelity imagery. We did like this history piece
Mhm.
for this company, and some of the historical photos, they were just too low res, right? So
Mhm.
we upscaled that with AI, right? That's like a huge win. And it's like those
Mhm.
elements that I think are really good. The thing about AI right now is people look at it like a easy button, like they want to press AI button and save money. You have leaders at these companies who are pressing, marketing teams, folks listening to this, like how are we using AI? They're pressing AI because they see that as a lens to save money. Right now, for me, I feel like you can almost get some of that through just systemization.
Mhm.
Like people ask about AI, but really what they're asking for is we want to save money. How can we save money? And that's where I think, at the top of the hour, as we were talking about that case study project, coming up with a unique templatization approach and systemization approach enabled us to make those videos quicker and do them for cheaper. And that was a win for the client and a win for us because we still had the profitability on it.
Mhm.
So I think AI through the lens of some of these tools and platforms to help process, I like that. And I think that's fantastic. That's just new tech that we're using to work smarter, not harder. And then when it comes to like, the saving money component of it, I think thinking beyond just like AI and what that can be, but like what are innovative ways to do that to save money? And I think that's where systemization and modular content is really on the rise right now.
I really like that last point about like asking why. I think it just comes back to what's the intent. If you as a marketer are looking to a creative or an agency to use AI, like having that conversation of why. Is it just because no one knows what AI is doing? And so I think everyone's just trying to get like a little bit more insight from someone else, or is there a reason why behind the ask? Is always just an interesting take.
Oh
I
yeah.
also
Well, it's
feel
like
like
everyone feels like there's like, oh, there's AI being used. We're using
you
AI
do
too,
it.
right? Yeah,
You're
right.
doing it. Yeah. I also feel like when I think about AI, I mean, it goes back to you said it, it's like a tool. I think everyone should write down a list of things they don't want to be doing in their job, like on a day to day, and like what can AI do to help? Like one of the things that I've used it for is note taking for meetings, but
Oh,
like,
sure.
but I know AI won't take my job. We had a call with a client and we were joking about something like when the deadline was.
Oh, sure.
They wanted the video like fairly quickly. And in the call, the client said, "Oh, it's due on Friday." I looked at the meeting notes. AI doesn't get sarcasm. So it was like, it's due on Friday. So I know all the producers out there should know that your schedules, robots can't do schedules.
That's really funny. And yeah, AI assumes that clients are going to get some feedback on time.
Yeah, exactly.
That's funny. That's
Well,
funny.
in terms of going back to budgets, do you feel
Mm.
like there's something we've talked a lot about like maximizing budgets, finding ways to be cost effective? Do you feel like there's hidden costs in certain content production that someone might not know going into it?
No, that's a really good question. I think, you know, animation and kind of the post-production side to me feels as predictable as it can be. I made a joke about like but timelines and things like that. Like that's the biggest culprit I think for like post-production stuff is if they're shifting timelines. But what's harder on a production, so let's say someone wants to go do an interview series, make this content that could then create all this other content. The reality is with live action, you got to get coverage. And, sometimes it may take longer to capture it all. So if it's taking a while to get the different takes in there, you're running short on time. I mean, you might have to be paying overtime can creep in there if you're not able to move forward quick enough. That's why good producers are always so critical. Shout out to producers out there because you really got to keep things on pace. So like Shoot just has the ability to kind of blow up partly because of the timing that kind of goes into it. So I think that's just something to be aware about. And so if you are going to do a live action shoot, being cognizant about having someone on set who can really manage that time and keep things moving forward, I think is a really big piece of it.
Yeah, and I think that's why something that we've tried to do with all of our clients and would suggest to everyone is it's just good documentation. So especially if you're working with a client for the first time, the conversation of like, here's what could result in overages if we go on a shoot, or even when we're doing our animation projects, we're always having conversations of like, here's what's scoped, here's how that could turn into overage. It kind of goes back to like conversations ahead of time and documentation.
Well, I really love, speaking of documentation, like what you and our other producer Ashley do, which is the production kickoff, right? So at the very start of the project, outlining, defining some of the terminology that goes into it that gets marketers and creatives on the same page of what needs to happen, what the expectations are, where we're looking for feedback. And to your last point, where things could go off the rails. Here are areas that it could cost more money if we're not being careful. And I think that upfront communication, I bet you and I would agree on this. If you look at every problem that's ever kind of arisen on any project, it's almost always some sort of communication problem, a misinterpretation of something like that.
Misunderstanding.
Yeah. So just the importance of having that production kickoff and getting folks on the same page, I think is really, really critical.
Yeah. Love a good documentation, like any good producer.
Yeah, absolutely. I bet.
What do you think about switching back to most of our clients either have some sort of creative, whether they've got a strategist or a writer on their team. Some of our clients have more robust internal teams, whole departments of designers, animators, videographers. What do you think when a marketer is trying to make the decision if they have an in-house team or outsource it? What do you think that decision point is?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think part of it is driven by business demands. If the business has content that they're trying to put out there, either for sales enablement, marketing enablement, and there's a bandwidth hurdle internally on getting that done, that's like the first red flag that you probably need to bring someone else in. I think there's a scalability component as well too. If you feel like quality potentially is maybe slipping because of that volume of work that has to get done, if like you're seeing like it just doesn't quite feel as good as when we had smaller projects for our internal teams, that's another sign I think to kind of reach out. But luckily, I think there's lots of different stages for it. I mean, here at Dash, we really consider ourselves kind of like a fractional agency to our partners. We can really handle a volume of work that comes in, but that also might not be the right fit for everyone right away. Sometimes a simple freelance contractor being able to come in, especially if you have clear direction. I think that's it. If you bring in an individual contractor, a kind of a solopreneur who's really good at what they do and is a great creative, and you have clear direction on what you're going for, that might be the perfect fit. If you're kind of starting to navigate a little bit of ambiguity, like, hey, there's this big event or conference coming up, we need all this content, we're unsure of what that is, then maybe more of a studio or agency partner is the right mix. But I think, being able to fluctuate between those two things, outsourcing it when you need a lot of that help or keeping it internal, especially with things that we've been harping on today with like saving budgets with these templates and modular content, sometimes that's a great balance where you bring someone in for a month or two and then you get the needs and the creation from them to be able to take those templates and expand on it. I know when we started Dash, one of the things we did was really invest in our community, and something that I always highlight is why that's so beneficial is it because it really helps with scalability. We do internships, mentorships. We even throw an animation and motion design festival called the Dash Bash, which you and I are both in the weeds on planning right now, June 11th through 13th, 2025. We do that because we know if we get back to the community will give back to us. So when clients come to us and they say like, hey, we just have a couple of videos we need to do, not a problem. We're able to take it on. If they're like, hey, we need to make 10 to 15 videos over the next 3 months, that's where it's so valuable to have community partners that really know the space and being able to scale into that. So in short, getting back to your question about like, when is the right time to reach out for some of that help? I think if you have a lot of clarity and there's just a bandwidth problem, then maybe just bringing in a freelancer or two is the right place to start. And if you're moving into a space where there's just a huge volume that requires organization and the management of all this content, I think a studio or agency partner might be the right fit.
And just knowing how like marketing and events and advertising, I mean, just our industries and the ones around us move so quickly and so last minute. The one thing as you were talking that comes to mind is just the importance of those relationships.
Oh, yeah.
So whether if you're a content creator or marketer, having a connection of freelancers, of smaller contacts or agencies or studios like ours or like larger partners, it comes down to the relationships, which you never know when you're going to need to call somebody.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, I need you to start next week, and that stuff can only happen if you've got a foundation of a good collaborative relationship.
Oh my gosh. Or even the recommendations, right?
Yes.
Like, so even if like, hey, I'm busy, but I can't do, but let me connect you with some of these folks that happen building those relationships. And you got to do that in kind of the off time when you're not
like when you don't need the work to start tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. In terms of the work starting tomorrow, that can be a point of negotiation of like, we need to start ASAP. What do you feel like are other negotiation tips for content creators that are working on a tight budget, as so many are?
I think when it just comes to negotiations for either the marketer talking to the creative partner agency or the creative partner figuring out if they want to work with a client, you just want to really be on the same page and just feel like there's transparency there. If you're a creative and there's a big ask, be upfront about whether you feel like this is a feasible ask. I think sometimes there's this scarcity mindset where people feel like they need to say yes to everything and ultimately say yes to something that they're not totally fully equipped to handle. And so it's better to be upfront and say like, hey, look, this is a really tight timeline. If I'm going to take this on, I might have to scale up for freelance help. Be transparent about that, right? Or be transparent about like, I don't think I can actually do this. Can we be more flexible on the timeline? So don't just be in this position just to say yes to anything that comes up. And then from a marketing perspective, I think transparency on the budget is really important. A lot of times, and I think historically it comes from people just getting burned, which is unfortunate, but the reality is there are people out there who try to pull one over on you. But I think transparency is just really key for these partnerships. If you have a budget or you know what you want to work within, start with that. Be like, hey, this is the ask and kind of what I'm looking for. Here's the budget that I have. And it's going to do a couple of things. One, it's going to ensure that y'all are on the same page. Because if there's a disconnect on what you have and what the creative partner is charging, it eliminates any sort of back and forth right away. And two, conversely, even if it is not a great fit, if you've got a good relationship, as we were just talking about, that partner could still recommend someone that could help with those needs, right? So I think a lot of it when it comes to negotiation is just being transparent and upfront, kind of about, what you need, what everyone needs out of it. And the reality is with animation and video production, I mean, it's truthfully like shopping for a car. I mean, there's so many different options out there.
Wait,
And
first we were on a shelf and now we're on a car. I love the metaphors.
all the analogies, right? So like we've all ridden in a great Honda Civic. We've all had a friend who's had a wonderful Honda Civic. And a Honda Civic is a fantastic car. It's
It'll get you
reliable.
there.
It'll get you there, right? But it's not a Porsche. And if you need a
Mm.
Porsche, it's important to understand what a Porsche budget is. So that's where it comes back to transparency for me. It's like, let's get on the same page of what we're looking for, what we're trying to hit. Can we make it work within this range? And if not, who are some people that you could recommend that I could go talk to? I think that goes a long way. And the last little thing that I'll hit on here is like, usually there's three things, right? There's timeline, quality, and budget. You can usually pick two of those,
yeah.
right? So it's like, all right, you got a tight timeline. That means you're going to have like a hefty budget to go along with it. Or like, if you want quality, it means you're going to have a hefty budget. But if you got a low budget, then you got to have at least a really long timeline to go along with it. So some of those pieces I think are good to remember: time, quality, and budget.
Yeah. My favorite three things.
Time, quality, and budgets. That's right.
Yeah, I feel like it's also just goes back to, I was at SCAD in Savannah last weekend talking to motion designers, students, people ready to graduate, the youth. And one thing that I was talking about with potential producers, they're starting to get into producing, is like, it's rare that everything is black and white. Like there is so much gray area. And I think one of the important things for us, and whether it's with our clients or contractors, freelancers, vendors that we're working with, it's like it doesn't always have to be a yes or a no. It's it's a yes and this. No, but we could do that. It comes down to negotiating for what is the middle ground. Most people are reasonable, I've found. And so they're just trying to find a solution. If you can get creative, going back to what we're talking about, like problem solving, if you can help solve their problem, most of the time they're going to be okay with it,
Yeah, 100%. I just think so often, again, that there's just not the negotiation or not the communication ultimately. And I think that's what really defines like great relationships and why marketing and creative need to be working more in tandem together. It's like, let's put our cards on the table. Let's find what's reasonable middle ground. Maybe there's a non-negotiable deadline. Okay, that's fine, but I'm going to need more. I'm going to need more resources. So can we put a little bit more money behind it? Or if we need to save the money, can we be a little bit more flexible on the deadline? All those things kind of come into play.
Yeah, there's always room for negotiation. All right, switching topics. In this TikTok short attention span world we live in, I am guilty of it, as anyone. How do you feel like short form video content is comparing to like long form content? Is there a need for long form content?
Oh yeah, I think there's a usage for everything out there. I mean, short form definitely feels like the star of the show right now. I mean, short form gets like high engagement. It's very shareable, works well on social media. Algorithms are picking that up. It's very algorithm friendly. It's very digestible. Typically there's lower production costs. Especially when it comes to animation. Production, sometimes you're still having to get a shoot set up even for a little bit of content, but for animation in particular, the less you have to animate, the cheaper it can be. And then I think it's really good for like quick messaging, brand awareness, like almost like top of funnel type stuff when it comes to marketing. Long form still has a really good place though, because it's stronger storytelling in depth. The person that's really interested in watching the long form content is truly kind of deeper in the funnel and more of a target customer for you. I also think there's a lot of like education that comes into the longer form content. It's a great opportunity to educate folks more on the details of your products or service. There's SEO benefits. YouTube prioritizes longer form content when it comes to search results. And then I think just going back to like the higher conversion rates, if you get someone who's actively watching these longer videos, really just shows they're loyal to your brand. You have the in-depth education, they're interested in that. And so I think there's more of a likelihood for conversion. So I don't think it's a one play versus the other. Kind of goes back again to the content shelf and just understanding what channels you need to be activating in. A lot of times the short form can drive to longer form content. And maybe that's a way that you can transition a prospective buyer into more of a buyer deeper in the funnel, because now you're getting them on more of the longer form. So I think there's a place for both.
Yeah. I think I agree with that. I think it's also important to know where your audience is. Again, it goes back to that discussion of where is your audience. I know some industries are more likely to sit and watch a longer form YouTube video,
Oh yeah.
even though it goes against my scrolly brain, you know?
Your ADD lizard brain that wants to just get more content.
15 seconds over and over.
That's right. That's funny.
Well, on that same vein, how do you feel like AI and automation is changing content creation and like different brands' approach to that?
I think with content creation, so Dash is coming up on our 10-year anniversary, right? Which is super
Wild.
exciting. And, prior to that, I had like another 5-6 years in the agency space. And so I've seen a lot of change over the years. And I think like anything, there's always a pendulum. It's always heavy one way and then back the other. I think we're definitely in this space of like volume right now. It just feels like there's just so much stuff everywhere, and that folks feel like the way that they're going to compete is to put stuff everywhere. Now, I don't want that to sound like it's against what I said on the content shelf. I mean, that kind of plays into it, right? You have to have it everywhere. But I do think you can't ignore like the human story. Like while UGC is important, it can't just be thrown out there. It really needs to be authentic to you and your brand. And so whatever content pieces you're putting out there, you want it to carry some quality and you want it to have intention. It can't just feel like you're making it to make it. So for me, I think the rise of AI and automation has really put us into this volume play of content. But I also think it's put us in this space where people are so saturated that they're not paying attention as much anymore. And what they are paying attention to is like good, authentic stuff, stuff that has intention and quality. So I feel like we're on the precipice of really starting to swing back to a more creatively focused, unique space where production quality itself is going to start to separate itself from the crowd because there's just so much stuff out there that looks alike.
Yeah. I think that again just goes back to like the problem solving nature that creatives like innately are, is something that can't be replicated necessarily in AI, and following that instinct is what's going to separate you from feeling so like homogenous amongst everything else.
Well, yeah, and it's like, the reality is like anytime you're in a space that you don't know a ton about, you kind of want a chaperone to kind of help you through it. So even with all this change and all this content, all this stuff that's out there, the reality is people still want that human connection to take them into this space of ambiguity and give some clarity for it. So anyone who's worried in the creative space that I think the AI or our tech is going to take your job, the reality is it's not. People are still going to want that human connection and someone to be that voice as you're creating all this stuff. And how do you make it feel more authentic? How do you bring that storytelling piece to the table?
Yeah. I do feel like that what could not take your job from you, but like the freeze of not wanting to change could result in like not evolving with the technology. So the idea that like robots might not take your job, but your unwillingness to adapt your thinking or your thought process, like, I don't know, just thinking through hundreds of years of evolution and as a society, how we've evolved, like the people that have been progressive and thinking forward,
change is scary. Stagnation is scarier. Mm-hmm. So
well put. All right, we've talked about a lot, like maximizing content. Do you feel like there's one thing that some brands worry about when they're doing live action is that it's going to make it even shorter of a lifespan because, like, say one of the people from that company leaves or it can't be updated as easily. Do you feel like there's a way to maximize lifespan for content?
I think that there are a lot of trends that come and go, and trends feel like they could fade. So not just hopping on something because it feels like the trendy approach to something, I think is important. But I think the piece and the element that we've been kind of harping on today in our conversation that I think is probably most critical to ensure you have evergreen content is building something for that change. How do you build something that can evolve? So, the systemization, the modularity, and construction of content, I think is more important than ever before, not only from a long-term perspective, where if you want to reuse that video in a year or two, that you can go back in and adjust it, but even in the short term, you think about something might have a spring launch that by the time it's getting to the fall, they want something a little bit different. So being able to create something that can switch out, substitute out copy, change text, substitute out imagery, I think is really important. even as we do a lot of motion branding, it's been definitely a new offering that we've been doing a lot. How a brand starts to move, even when we think about that construction, is building something in a way that can be evergreen for the company's change. Like, how do you build something for the future? It has to evolve. It has to have some flexibility. So giving constraints that have some of that flexibility. So I think just it's building content for change.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And being flexible.
And being flexible, 100%. Yeah, I mean, the reality is just this. We're in a new state of the industry. We're in a space where stuff is constantly changing. There's new stuff out there. There's the scary part of change. We know we need to be doing it. And the reality is, collectively, on all these topics we've been chatting through, is that there is a little bit of an unknown. So what do you lean on? When I'm in a space that I don't know or I'm still learning about, you lean on peers and friends. So your community, I think, is more important, and your partnerships, not only with other teams, but other specialists who are really good. That's where it goes back to the importance, I think, of like breaking down these silos. Like the day and the age of being able to have everything segmented from one another and produce a successful product is just by the wayside. You have to have teams that are talking to one another. Marketing has to be talking to creative. Creative has to be talking to strategy. All three of these need to know what sales is doing, right? I mean, just having an understanding holistically of where everyone's at and what the goals we're pushing for is more important than ever. So luckily, we've got these great podcasts like the one we're on right now, Meryn Hayes, to educate and inform people on this. And I can't believe we're already coming up on the end of the show. Season 1, episode 1. Super excited for more of these deep conversations. As we get into this, if you're listening and you have a thought or an idea, put it in the comments. We're always open to suggestions on what we should be talking about, always open to ideas on other folks we could interview, and really just any sort of hot takes or takes in general that you have on some of the things we talked about today. We encourage it. We love it. We want to hear from it. So we love it. Awesome. Well, Meryn, thanks so much for hanging with me today. Thank you all for kicking it with us, and we will see you all soon for episode 2. Thanks, everyone.
The next one. Bye.